All right, everybody. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we're doing today, where we're headed this week, and then also what's going on with compare and contrast. The homework is due today. But before we turn it in, I want to make sure that you did it right. So please lend me your ear and I'll go over it. Okay, so just quickly overview of the week. We're going to review compare and contrast. We're going to talk about argument as a mode of invention. Remember, I encourage you to think about various modes you might be able to add to or implement with regard to this essay. It's not really a formal requirement, although, like I said, I think definition plays a big role. Perhaps compare and contrast would, perhaps argument would. I'm just trying to sort of enrich and broaden your understanding of what you can do in a personal essay and how you might actually do it. We are going to start talking about formatting today. I'll continue this as well on the first block period. But I wanted to just give you a visual of what a final draft looks like. You do not need to do a works cited for this essay, so don't panic when you see the works cited in the sample student paper. It's from a different assignment. Homework is going to be to keep working on your personal essay. It'll be due Thursday at the start of the class. And the only reason I did that was just so that you wouldn't be tempted to think you could work on it over Labor Day weekend. I want to kind of turn it in and start and turn the page, so to speak, and start a new unit on Thursday. So that's that. All right. Let's talk about compare and contrast. So you had an assignment to read Two Views of the Mississippi River by Mark Twain. It's in the module from last Friday. And when you read that piece, you notice that he's comparing and contrasting his experiences with the Mississippi River as a child or as a young person that recreated and went there for, I guess you would say, fun, spiritual renewal, beauty, all the things that we do when we go to the river. And then as an adult, he became what's called a riverboat pilot, which is somebody who drove one of the big steamboats up and down the river. And he had to look at the river very differently, right? So there's that line about a small eddy or wrinkle could be a giant snag that could actually ruin the ship, right? So something before that was really majestic and beautiful became something that was dangerous. And so it's a great example of compare and contrast. One of my former professors actually wrote a book that actually talked about different types of writing for this class, this 1A class. He taught it. And he used this as an example, right? Because compare and contrast is just so central to just about any type of academic writing we do, whether it's comparing different views on a piece of literature and trying to come to a consensus about what the best one is, or if it's comparing different sources on a topic, or just like in this case in our own lives, like taking things that we can relate to and talking about the contrast between, whether it's between siblings or between phases or eras of life, or just modes of thinking. So if you looked at the handout, which again is attached in the module from last Friday, you'll notice that for compare and contrast, there's two primary models. And what happens is you have to pick bases of comparison. Bases of comparison are not the two things that you're comparing and contrasting. Bases of comparison are what you actually use that are common between those things. So, like for instance, if you had apples and oranges, two different types of fruit, right? We actually could compare and contrast, but we'd have to make sure that these things are the same. It's unfair to talk about taste for apples and sugar content for oranges. So whatever your bases of comparison are, they have to be the same for both things. So it would be totally inappropriate for Mark Twain to talk about, the beauty of the river when he was a young person and then compare it and contrast it with, I don't know, the speed at which he traveled as an adult. Those are two different things. So he picked like things he saw in the river and he compared them from two different vantage points. All right. So I gave you the examples here. This is one way to do it, right? Um, you don't have to actually write out a paragraph about this. I just wanted you to practice making the outline. If you did write it out, more power to you. Like, you're awesome. And it's probably a better application of it than just doing the outline, because really, in order for this to make sense, you have to reflect on these things. You have to reflect on the similarities and differences. So, how is the taste of apples similar or different to the taste of oranges? So, you could do the same thing for a sugar content growing season. Um, Mark Twain presents the two perspectives. Basically, what you've been asked to do is something very similar, right? So another example of how to do a compare and contrast is to pick your basis of comparison and then talk about that basis of comparison for each thing. So in this model, the basis of comparison are gas mileage, load hauling capacity, and body shape slash design. And the two things that are being compared and contrasted are Ford trucks and Chevy trucks. So it would be inappropriate to do a paragraph about Ford's gas mileage and a paragraph about Chevy's body shape, and then basically say Chevy's better because it has a better body design, right? Because there's nothing that for like gas mileage doesn't have anything specifically to do with body shape. So the first model is doing everything about one and everything about thing two, right? So taste, sugar content, growing season, taste, sugar content, growing season. The second model is doing basis of comparison, both things. Basis of comparison two, the two things you're comparing and contrasting. Basis of comparison three, the two things you're comparing and contrasting. This works really well for longer papers. Anything over a page or two or like 500 words, you would almost explicitly use this model. The reason is because if I read a 7-page paper that you wrote, and the first 3 pages you talked about, I don't know, let's just say the socioeconomic dynamics of growing up in rural Mississippi. And so you did, what that was like. And then you did the socio-economic dynamics of growing up in rural Mississippi. And then you maybe talked about the landscape. And then you maybe talked about social pressures. Well, if you spent 4 pages doing that, and then you talked about the socioeconomic aspects of growing up in North India, the landscape, and the social pressures in North India, by the time I got to the end of your paper, I might have forgotten everything that you said about Mississippi. It's just too much to process. So it makes more sense to do this model where you take the two things you're comparing and contrasting and you pick a basis of comparison, and that's one section of your paper. And then two things you're comparing and contrasting, another basis of comparison, that's another section of your paper. Because again, if I read 4 pages about gas mileage, load hauling capacity, and body shape of Fords, and then I read 4 pages about Chevy, by the 8th page of your paper, I might have forgotten what you said about Ford, and it's just not really organized effectively for your reader. So for longer papers, this is the model that you want to use. You still pick your basis of comparison, but you talk about both things with regards to that as it comes. So, again, further example, kind of taking Mark Twain's design. Um, you could talk about life after high school, then and now. So maybe when you're a freshman, what did you think your dreams for your future might be like? What were your plans with friends? And what was your excitement level about working when you thought about life after high school? Well, typically, most people are pretty excited about working. They have tons of plans with friends, and they have big dreams for their future. And then when you take that as a senior, right, your dreams for the future might still be big, but they might be a lot more focused. And your plans with friends might have changed drastically. And your excitement about working, maybe you've already been working for 2 summers and you're not too excited about it, right? So that would be an example of using a model. And again, this is a great way to do it for a shorter piece. If we were going to do it for a longer piece, we would do dreams for the future um, at freshman year, and then at senior year, plans with friends at freshman year and senior year, excitement about working at freshman year and senior year. Remember, it's called compare and contrast because you're actually talking about similarities and differences. You're not just listing facts. So you do have to provide for your reader some contrast. So what changed? So in your notes, it's good to write down with compare and contrast when you're going through these bases of comparison. You should be writing down what changed. So everyone go ahead and write that down in your notes now. So that's really what you're talking about. What has changed, or what's different and why? You know, you could look at this very simply and you could say, what's different between the taste of an apple and the taste of an orange, right? You're not just going to list, well, apples taste, you know, kind of sugary and they go well with certain spices. And if you add brown sugar to them, it really enhances the flavor when they're cooked. Whereas oranges are more tangy and zesty. You can use the rind for certain cooking applications, and it tends to be paired with other spices. And usually white sugar, not brown sugar, in cooking applications, right? So you would want to talk about what's different. All right. So that's compare and contrast. And if you're thinking about how you could maybe use this on your paper, you might want to think about like what has changed. Or, you know, a lot of those prompts ask questions about a time that something changed, or to describe or define for yourself something that you're really passionate or that is all encompassing for you. So a great way to use the compare and contrast model is to talk about something and then talk about something that's different from that. Maybe you were different your freshman year and now you've gone through a lot of experiences and you've changed. And you can compare and contrast those based on similar basis of comparison, right? So you might, instead of just having a paragraph about what's different with regards to you, you would have, let's just say, your relationship with friends. How have you changed? And then how does that communicate the prompt? So that's how you would employ sort of a compare and contrast model in this type of an assignment. So make sure that at least you have the two outlines, or at least you have the outline, I'm sorry, for what it is that you chose. And that was basically all I asked you to do. If you did write out the paragraph, that's awesome. Attach that as well. I'll be able to see if you really grasp it. And if you didn't, it's not a big deal. The minimum was just doing the outlines. If you wrote the paragraph but didn't do the outlines, quickly outline what your topics are and what your basis of comparison are and which model you picked, so it's easy for me to figure it out. I don't want to read the paragraph and have to guess. Are we all clear on that? You need to have the outlines. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the mode of invention argument. So you want to take out a specific document that you're going to use here, that you're going to take notes on. And we're going to talk about argument for a second. So let me just fix this because it looks like I linked the wrong thing. We're going to talk about argument a lot this year. This is just a like really in beginning sort of preview. But if we look at this chart here, we find that argument and persuasion has 5 points. And we're going to focus on them a little bit right now. So in order to argue well, you must understand your audience and know your purpose. Write down in your notes that your purpose is to answer the prompt convincingly and effectively, essentially illustrating who and what you are about with regards to that prompt. So you're putting yourself out there. It's a personal essay. We could all answer the prompt somewhat easily, but what we want to do is we want to give the best answer in terms of like representing the value that you have, your mind at work here. But essentially, in simplification, is it's just your purpose here is to answer the prompt. Okay. Um, Understand the three principal kinds of appeal: emotional appeal, appeal to intelligence and reason, and ethical appeal. You may have heard of those. That's called logos, ethos, and pathos. And in the order that they're presented here, it would be pathos, logos, and ethos. The most effective arguments combine all three. I like to think of it, depending on the prompt, like a burrito. Pathos is the emotional, and it could be like the salsa. Logos is the factual and reasonable. That's usually like the main ingredients. And ethos is appeal to character and competence. That's sort of like the tortilla and everything enclosing it. Obviously, you don't want to eat a burrito that's just tortilla and salsa. That would be literally a mess. So you have to have all three, and we'll talk a lot about that this year. Construct an argument as a lawyer would construct a case. And again, this isn't an argument specific prompt that you're answering, but you do need to think of yourself like a lawyer for yourself. You're presenting your best possible answer to this prompt. So, what are your best possible reasons for the insights that you want to give? Always assume your audience is intelligent, although some members of it may be uninformed on a particular issue. And I would add to that, they might be slightly skeptical. We'd like to think that everyone is perfectly fair in life, but every once in a while you come across someone who's a little bit more skeptical about what you're trying to say. So it's your job to kind of get your point across and to support it. And then avoid three common pitfalls. Don't overstate your claims. Be careful not to oversimplify an issue, and support your argument with concrete evidence, not generalizations. For a personal essay like this, that's really kind of a memoir, or a creative response to something based on your experience. What you want to do is, when I say concrete evidence here, we talked about imagery. We talked about sort of creating a scene or like a flashback, descriptions. We even talked about senses, and literally sense, textures, like things that can make sense to your reader, and also so that they can picture and feel it. Okay, so that's kind of the overview of argument. And we're going to just talk briefly for a minute. I'm going to put a couple of notes up about, what you would do for argument for this. So first thing that you want to do is you want to take your prompt, and this is a good revision activity. And you basically want to outline the main things it's asking. Okay, and we already kind of did this, right? Where you put down your ideas. Sort of list the ideas you have in response to it. Details. What are the things you use? All right, so we did this at the start, and you all had a chart. I'm going to venture a guess that what you put on that chart is not what you have in your essay for at least half of you, because this is human nature. When you start writing, you end up somewhere typically quite different than where you intend at the beginning. So I want you to update this for yourself. Just in your notes, this is for you. What is the main idea that you're trying to get across in response to this prompt, and what details do you use? I'm going to specifically talk about this through the lens of argument right now. First thing I want to talk about is a reason. Okay. Reasoning is commentary about a detail, explaining how it supports your explaining how it supports your idea. So, in other words, if you were asked about a time where you changed your mind about something and you told an anecdote about how a friend, convinced you to think differently, well, then you would want to reason about that a little bit and explain like why you changed your mind and why it's important, why it matters. Um, Consider personal and perhaps communal good. What I will say that to that is like personal connections to why it matters, and sort of like global connections, or like you could just say human connections. So your commentary, you might be kind of explaining how a friend changed your opinion, or a series of events changed your opinion, or maybe you came from one type of culture and you moved to a different area and you had culture shock and you were very judgmental, right? All that's super important, okay? But what's also important is why you recognizing that that judgment was incorrect and why you changing your opinion matters, right? Because if you just list the reasons that you changed your opinion without really connecting personally or even like globally why it matters, the reader is just going to go, oh, here's a bunch of reasons that they changed their opinion. And I guess they seem like good reasons. They seem like a reasonable young person. But if you can make personal and perhaps global or human connections, then the reader is going to recognize, wow, not only is this person being metacognitive or reflective about why they changed, but also why it's important. And now they can see the value in that. So that's where the argument part of a personal essay like this comes out, where you are a lawyer in a way, sort of arguing for the value or meaning of your experience slash realization. So now you've kind of zoomed out and you're looking at the big picture and you're thinking about why this matters, why it's important. So when I say the communal good, it just means why it would be good for somebody else. Like, why do we think about this? What's worth? Why is it worth thinking about? I'll use my example where I thought I was being really open-minded, and in reality, my friend kind of called me out for being like somewhat closed-minded and perhaps even maybe unwittingly a little bit racist. And that changed my way of thinking about this. And so I had to reconsider my ideas. Well, this is important because obviously I don't want to go on believing this if it's harmful to other people, right? But it's important to kind of like close that circle a little bit so that the readers understand that you know what you're talking about. And then finally, the final last piece is anticipate concerns or objections. This is where perhaps definition can help in making your unique viewpoint and subsequent argument of why it matters come to. So this is where maybe you need to define terms a little bit more. This is where I was asking you about, did you have an abstraction? Did you have something that maybe made sense to you, but it wasn't really defined? What somebody who's a little bit skeptical, might they disagree with you? Might they say, well, yeah, your central realization in life happened when you were in 5th grade. Well, you're you're 16 now, you're 17 now. Haven't you grown past that? Why is that your most important thing? It's not that your idea is wrong if you can think of a concern or objection somebody might raise. It's just that it's your job to kind of help get your point across in light of that. And that can really help your revision, right? So I know students, we never really want to revise our work. We never really want to take it to that extreme. But what we can do is we can start asking some of these questions along the lines of these modes. We talked about compare and contrast. Maybe a compare and contrast is a way to build a structure for you to communicate the meaning of your argument. But then you got to think about some of the concerns that might come up, or why it matters and how you really need to show that. And that's where you want to make sure that somebody is going to walk away just with a complete understanding of what you want to say. And look, this is about all I'm going to do with this, right? I'm not going to line edit this for you and give you all my feedback on it. We will put it in the portfolio and we will revisit it at the end of the semester, maybe, and definitely the end of the year. But this is a personal essay, and I'll go over the rubric tomorrow of how I'm going to grade it. But basically, this is what I want to say about it, and I want you to ask these questions and try to accomplish that meaning and really get your best version of your response out there. Okay, so finally then, I want to talk about formatting. So anytime you write a paper for this class, it's going to be in what is called MLA 8, which I think is the newest, maybe even MLA 9. I know they're revising it this year. But MLA stands for Modern Language Association. And this is how it should look. First of all, your paper's double spaced, and there are no extra spaces between paragraphs. Second of all, you have a title, and it almost looks like a sentence. It's just centered, and it's not, there's no extra spaces between it and the first paragraph. You have a heading, which is your name, my name, the class you're in, and the date, done like this. So our class is English 1A, and the date is the day, the month, and the year. No comma in that order. Finally, at the top, you're going to have what's called a header, which is just your name and the page number. And I'm going to show you how to do that now. Let's see here. So if I wanted to start my final draft, the first thing that I would want to do is I would want to put my name, and I'm going to use a student name here. Samuel L. Student. And the teacher's name. English 1A. You can put the hyphen in here if you want. And then the date, which is the 30th of August, 2021. Now what I need to do is I need to put that header, or that header with pagination, and I want to show you how to do that. So you go to insert and you hit page numbers. So if you're following along on your Google Doc, insert page number, and you'll see you have 4 options. One where the page number is in the upper right on the first page. One where you have like a title page and then it's on the second. One where it's the lower right. One where the title page and then it's lower right on the second. You're always going to pick this one. So for this class. Other classes in college, you might have a title page, but for this, for MLA and for this class, this is perfect. So you're going to select this upper left-hand option, and you'll notice it has a 1. So if you click away from it, that highlighting goes away. If you double click next to it, you'll see that it comes back. And you just want to put your last name here. So I'm going to change the name of my student so it's more clear. So Samuel L. Studebaker. So my last name, the student last name is Studebaker. So you'll notice it has last name and the page number. If you scroll down, you'll see that it's on every page. So once I start writing a second page, it'll be on it. So Studebaker 2. So that is what you need for MLA formatting for your header and your heading. Okay. Now, your title. Your title typically is going to have 3 things in it. It's going to have the main idea that you're trying to get across, and the topic, and the text that you're referring to. Well, we're not referring to a text in this one. So just the main idea and the topic. So, and you could say I in it because it's a personal essay and you're saying I throughout, but you might say something like, let's see here. Mine was on like a pivotal realization about I might put race here too, because that was something that came up in mine, because my example, my friend is a PhD candidate and Black woman, and she was very, very clear about how my ideas depicted her, and I learned a lot from her. You'll notice that some words are capitalized and some words are not. I will include a link for how to capitalize your title, but basically, the first word of a phrase is always going to be capitalized, and sort of like prepositions are not capitalized and infinitives are not capitalized. So I will include a link for that, so you can just type it in and it'll automatically capitalize it correctly for you. And then once you've done that, you want to center it. And then you start align left, and you can actually at that point, you could actually start it here. You could go to formatting and double space. So format, paragraph, line spacing, and paragraph. And so I want to go to double. And then now here we go. And I align left and I begin. It all started in a car ride down Highway 99. Right? So that's the beginning of mine. I'm going to go ahead and indent it. And away we go. So you do not need a works cited for this. And that is that. So we're working on this, finishing it up. We're going to be going over the final draft requirements in block day 1. And good luck.